Okay, we're going live now. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming in this evening on perhaps the warmest evening of the summer so far, and welcome for those that have attended from the public gallery at the end there. So we'll move forward, and I should just say welcome to three new members of Cabinet. So Councillor Rory McCaw, welcome, Rory. Councillor Sam Coleman, who is elevated to Cabinet, and well done, Sam, for all that you've been putting in over these last 4 years. And Councillor Aaron Rathbone-Ariel, and it's nice to see you. Goodo. Well, if I can authorise me to sign the minutes of the last meeting held on the 27th of March, it seemed an awful long time ago.
Move.
Thank you very much indeed, if I can pass that into that direction. Thank you, Lorna. Okay. So, apologies for absence, Julie. No apologies. And agenda items, any additional agenda items?
There are none, Chair.
Thank you very much. And any urgent decisions?
There are none, Chair.
Okay. Is an item withdrawn?
Item 11, Chair. There are no references from the performance report from Open and Scrutiny Committee.
Okay, thank you for that. Disclosures of interest. To receive any disclosure by members of personal, disclosable pecuniary interest in matters on the agenda, the nature of the interest and whether the member regards the personal interest as prejudicial under the terms of the Code of Conduct. Members are reminded of the need to repeat their declaration immediately prior to the commencement of the item in question. Okay, we can go straight into agenda item 6, which is role and functions. Lorna, are you going to introduce this, please?
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this report is to set out the role and functions of the Cabinet to the committee. This is part of our induction process. A report like this is submitted to the first meeting of the Council for each committee. I don't intend to go through the report, but happy to answer any questions, and the report is just to note.
A flood of questions coming in. I don't think anybody's got any questions to ask, but I am able to confirm that this has been supported by some of the excellent training induction that's been set together under Sue's chair of the Member Development Training Task Group and the Democratic Services Officers. And I think that from the response I've had from new members, I think they found it invaluable. And thank you very much for everything that's been put together there. And if there are any questions, of course, you know who your buddies are within Democratic Services in order to clarify where we're going. Okay, so let's move on. Climate Change Steering Group. This is on pages 9. Okay, so Ben, are you going to lead on this, and then with Catherine?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so the purpose of this report is to reconstitute the Climate Change Steering Group under the terms of reference as listed in the appendix. The Climate Change Steering Group was initially set up under the last administration. It did some really, really good progressive work in relation to our climate change agenda. I think with the upcoming relook at our climate change strategy, what previously was the environment strategy, this group is going to be a really key group in helping steer the priorities that we have as part of that strategic approach. So, as listed in the report, this is just about reconstituting that group as we go forward. There was some questions about whether this group could be formalised as a standing committee of the council. I think what we will look to do is look at the pros and cons of that approach and what benefits that may or may not bring to advancing the agenda, and we'll report back to Cabinet in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ben. Catherine, would you like to add some comments on this, please?
Yes, I would. In fact, so I very much endorse this report. As the erstwhile chair of the last iteration of this, it took us a while to get going because of COVID and various things. But we developed a pattern whereby we met on the same day, which was the last Thursday, every month. And it was really helpful to have that fixed in our minds. We had a lot of conversations, and I think it's fair to say we were sometimes quite robust with the officers present in a way that would be inappropriate if we were in a public meeting, which isn't to say we shouldn't have public meetings. We should, but not as regularly as once a month. I would also say, with regard to the terms of reference, they're quite prescriptive, but certainly as it was chaired last council, All comers were welcome and all comers were given the ability to speak, and it was very much a round table, albeit on screen, discussion of the items on the agenda. And I think it was very useful, and it helped to push forward lots of projects. People, as you know, have many good ideas, and it was a really good place to discuss their good ideas outside the constraints of a formal structure with people listening. And then we had the minutes of the meeting, and they were published, they were online. So it wasn't a secret closed-door meeting, it was just that the discussions themselves, we were free to be, well, as I said, robust. So yes, I have no hesitation in supporting this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Councillor Sue Project, sir.
Yeah, I'm very happy to second it, and I think perhaps we've reached a compromise, which is always good. That I think one of the problems we had was because of the start, the rather false start we had, that Councillor Field has mentioned, is that we were battling initially with fairly negative publicity, that we actually weren't doing anything, nothing was happening, which, as Councillor Field said, it wasn't true. So we've got to find that balance between really including and welcoming and being accountable and making sure people can attend in a formal meeting, but also having what Councillor Field has described, the sort of informal discussions and tossing around ideas of what can and can't be done. So I think this is probably the way forward, and I would like it to make sure that we have communication with the many environmental groups we have in Rother, to actually let them know what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any other comments or questions that need to be raised at this stage? I believe, I think we've really gained some sort of momentum with this since the acquisition of two excellent officers under Ben's wing, and actually giving the actual group itself that ability to progress where we are. So thank you very much for that, Liz. Did you want to make any comment as to where we are on this? Please do if you wish.
No, I had no further comment.
I just want to give you the opportunity to. Okay, so I think this is a report that effectively it's... do we vote on this? Is it resolved?
Sorry, Chair.
I'm sorry, Paul.
That's right, Chair. I thought whilst I'm sat here, my name's on the previous list, I'll just reiterate that I would be keen to continue if there's a space for me, if my group allow it.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, okay, so you're on the retained list then. That's good. Okay, that's fine. So we have a proposer here. Yeah, and a second, that's fine. And those in favour of the way we go forward on this, I think it's spot on, and thank you very much indeed.
We do need to know who's on it.
Oh, do we?
Yes,
okay,
yeah.
so okay, so Paul has declared himself available for the coming season. Councillor Projak, Councillor Coleman, Councillor Field, Councillor Polly Gray, I think, has accepted an invitation, I believe. Yeah, thank you very much for confirming that. Okay, anything else I need to tie on this? That's fine. Excellent. Okay, let's move forward. Okay, thank you for that. Sorry.
The terms of reference do say that it will be 2 executive members and others. Well, you've just named 3 of us. So myself, Councillor Projak and Councillor Coleman. Which doesn't worry me in the slightest. It's just that it doesn't quite comply with the terms of reference on page 12. Happy to amend the terms of reference, but I think I would need to amend the terms of reference or change the membership.
Was it because previously the membership was... Yeah, okay. Sam wasn't on that. What's the easiest way around that, Lorna, Julie? Yeah, okay. If you're happy with that, we can change the terms of reference.
Yeah.
Because there's continuity now, isn't there? I think that's the important thing. Otherwise, it means somebody coming in and having to catch up where you've got to there. So, any other comment? Anything else? No, that's fine. So we move on then. Okay, agenda item 8, enforcement of environmental offences. So this is the report that Richard has put together with his team. Licensed and Community Safety, along with Deborah Keneally. Are you going to lead this report, Hazel? Yeah, so Councillor Timper will lead this report, and we've got Richard here to pick up any questions that need to be referred to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, this now falls under my portfolio, which is why I'm introducing it. And we're here tonight to seek approval to continue with the concessionary agreement with National Enforcement Solutions, which we all know as NES Limited, to carry out the enforcement of environmental offences. This would maintain the current level of enforcement for environmental offences, improving the quality of the local environment and the lives of residents impacted by such offences. Since the end of August, the Council has employed a private company, NES, to carry out the enforcement of certain environmental offences, including dog fouling, littering and fly tipping. This was a new approach from the Council, a rigorous and robust approach to enforcement. Over 1,000 fixed penalty notices were served in the first 6 months. Since the introduction of NES patrols in Bexhill Town Centre, for example, domestic and commercial waste is rarely being left on the pavement during the day, which before was unsightly and hazardous. This summer, NES staff will be patrolling Canberra during busy weekends. Hopefully this will reduce littering, which is a significant source of annoyance to local residents and costly for the council to clear. I think Councillor Osborne would agree. By using a concessionary agreement, there are no costs to the council, as these are met from the income received by the company by issuing fixed penalty notices. The council receives an income of 30% of the FPNs paid, which can be used for the removal of graffiti, waste and cleaning bus shelters, which currently the cost for doing that is about £9,000. Anyway, I'll hand over now to anybody who wishes to question me or Mr. Parker Harding, hopefully.
Thank you. Thank you, Hazel, for that report. There may be some questions, I think, that we can field, and perhaps they can go through initially through Richard. That would be very useful. Councillor Project-Sue.
Thank you. I do agree with the report that it would be premature to actually not renew this contract for another 2 years. The thing that surprised me about all this is the shock that some people have that they are actually breaking the law when they drop litter. And the thing that I learned was actually that cigarette butts are actually the worst form of pollution and higher than plastic in our seas. And obviously they get into seawater through the drains, etc. And it's toxic to marine life. They contain plastic, they contain arsenic, they contain lead, they contain nicotine, of course, and takes years and years to break down. So I'm really glad that we've already seen the effect of this enforcement. I mean, the Litter Act has been enforced for 60 years. It's been illegal to drop litter for 60 years, and it has been a shock to some of our residents, I know that. But I think it's proved now that if we target places that are a problem, and councillors should remember they've got a direct line to NES if they want them to pick up a problem for us. They have a direct line. So I would support the recommendation.
Thank you for that. Are there any other comments to make? No comment? Oh, yes, there is. Councillor Sam Coleman. Sam?
Thank you, Chair. I think it is just worth pointing out that whilst I think it's important this contract continues, because certainly the difference in the amount of litter in the area has been very much noticeable. Even in Sidley, we've had a huge reduction in the amount of sort of just street detritus and litter that I've noticed around. Not completely solved. There's still a sofa just down the road for me that was recently fly tipped and a few other things, but it's getting better now. But I do think we need to just bear in mind as we go forward that there has been some teething issues, and I think Richard's well aware of this, and NES are aware of it, and they're sort of working on making sure, because obviously, particularly from my angle, looking at those residents who are sort of hard up or facing hardship, a fine of several £100 hits someone who's on low income a lot more than it does someone who can maybe bear that burden once or twice. And so I know, because it's a fixed penalty notice, there isn't any capacity in law to sort of be more generous with how much people pay or can't pay, and you can't do instalments and things. But I am glad that NES are able to extend the amount of time people have to pay it, and that there are procedures in place if people think they've been wrongly fined to address it. So I think we just need to make sure we tease out those procedures and make sure that it's as compassionate as it can be, because we want to promote good behaviour and punish people who are seriously littering and not just sort of making people's day bad because they've made a mistake. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you for those comments, Sam. And I think the presentation that all members had last week, I believe, highlighted the progress that NES have made and how slick their service is. I think their back office function is an exceptionally good one. There have been some issues early on, which I think we all anticipated. It was when we, Councillor Projak took the initiative on this and spoke to other local authorities. But we've got through those difficult sort of teething periods, and I think it does act as a deterrent to people, and people should understand, because I think that this petty littering becomes more prevalent littering later on. They can get away with it, they think, so that's fine. I've got Councillor Bayliss. Christine.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. And I mean, I would support the recommendation. As Councillor Coleman has pointed out, there were a few teething issues at the beginning. I think we have to bear in mind about education and promotion. That is something that we really need to do. So, for example, businesses and waste disposal. There was a lot of misinformation out there about what some people didn't actually understand their legal responsibilities. And we have, I think, a role to play in promoting that, and also through the Chamber of Commerce's and other, things like the Rother Business Alerts, for example. But on balance, the transformation of Central Ward has been quite exceptional. I was in sort of 2019-20. I was out litter picking most weekends, and haven't had to do that as much since August last year. If you talk to the vast majority of residents, they are absolutely, in favour of how cleaner the town looks. And certainly, the litter that's was being left out all day has, by and large, has stopped. There's still a problem with seagulls. I don't know what NES can do about them, but they are, they will scavenge, especially this time of year where we've got very, very early mornings. The only thing I would say is it would be great if we can make sure that our litter collection, our third litter collection, I think we do the bins, is done fairly late on in the day, which means that litter bins aren't overflowing at 9 p.m. at night, especially this time of year. But generally, on the whole, I think it's a positive story, and so I would support a continuation, but with better, perhaps, education and better comms. Thank you.
Yep, I would endorse everything that was said there. I think it's an excellent service that we've brought in, and I think we've got over the early teething problem. So we need to move this report and then the second of this report.
Yeah.
And then we will vote on it.
Thanks, everybody, for your comments, and I'd like to move the report, please. Thank you.
I will second the report.
Thank you, Councillor McCourt. Thank you, Rory. Can we put that to the vote then, please? That's unanimous. Anybody against it? No. Any abstentions? One abstention. Okay, we'll move forward on to the next item. Thank you. Can I just, before we move on, Councillor Barnes, you did drop me a line with regard to some of the statistics on page 19, which I've had a look at. I think those fixed penalty notices were pre-NES, so I think that we're just identifying that we really weren't having much success or not able to undertake any really effective deterrence on this. I think that might just cover off that point. Okay, we'll move on, if we may, then to agenda item 9. This is a report of Ben Hook with Cabinet Lead Councillor Rathbone Ariel on net zero pledge for UK 100 membership. Aaron.
Thank you. Yeah. 340 councils have declared a climate emergency. And when that happened, 100 of those joined and became the UK 100. In 2021, the UK government recognised that 82% of UK emissions are within the scope of local authorities. In January 2023, a report by Chris Skidmore MP identified net zero as an opportunity of the 21st century, with the benefits being greater the swifter the action of decarbonisation. That said, there's still a need for central government for help with legislation, funding and powers to enable much of this. The UK 100 will help bridge and define local, national net zero frameworks. UK 100 has completed a report that identified areas where help can be given, such as transport, buildings, energy and waste. And in relation to Rother in June 2022, the Planning and Policy Team proposed RDC become UK 100 members, and that was prior to the Environment Strategy Officer starting in post. As part of the sign-up process, the leader, several members and senior officers met with UK 100 to learn more. And it was agreed membership would be valuable and provide members and officers with opportunities to engage with other ambitious councils. It would provide access and training and signal intent to the wider community that RDC is committed to reducing emissions across the district. RDC meets all the UK 100 requirements, and the next step is to formally agree to becoming members. As part of this, we will also be able to join the Countryside Climate Network, which will assist our rural areas who have a harder time limiting their carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Aaron. I think this does endorse what we set out to do back in creating climate emergency status back in 2019. And I think it was that natural progression that we come forward and we show that the intent is there. And I think that's such an important part to play. And also feeding into other councils and other organisations where we can gain benefit from that. I've got any questions from within? No, I've got Councillor Bayliss. Christine.
No, sorry, that's a leftover hand.
Oh, because you're not feeling well, you left your hand up. Okay, fine. Are there any questions? No, there aren't any questions. Any other points that wanted to be raised? Councillor Field. Catherine.
If this is the moment, I'd like to second this. I think we have done an awful lot of work on this already, and in no way would I wish to undermine the expertise of our own officers, but I think there's always value to be had in networking and talking to other people and swapping best practice. And so, yes, wholeheartedly support this move. Wish it success.
Thank you for that. So one's going to move the report and second the report, Councillor Field, Catherine, and those in favour of report, and that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for your work, Ben, that you may not have been involved in with this.
Well, I think most of the work went.
Oh, Lucy. Oh, right. Okay, Lucy. I wasn't aware of that. I didn't get a nudge from Ben, but well done. Did you want to add anything to the report, please?
I'm not going to let Ben take credit for that, no. No, just to say that I'm really looking forward to being a part of the membership. I think, yes, it absolutely provides opportunities for members, but it really does for officers as well. And I know Elise and I will really benefit from that too. So thanks.
Well, I think that you should have had your name in brackets after Ben. Good. Okay, well, we can move on from there. And we're now moving on to agenda item 10, which is your report, Joe. No one else is going to be claiming this report. It's yours. And are you going to move the report and introduce it?
Thank you, Chair. I'll certainly do that.
Thank you very much indeed.
I commend this report. I think the policy which is being reviewed and formulated by Joe and his team is a good policy. It's a hybrid policy which has come by an analysis of several comparable policies at comparable boroughs. Also, they've taken advice from DLUC as well, so it's gone through the mill, it has to be said. And the policy that's before us is an attempt to deal with the worsening reality of housing, both locally here. I mean, it's a massive issue. Latest figures from Shelter have outlined the housing crisis which befalls us nationally, when only, I think, less than 10,000 social homes were built in the last year. It's nothing new, of course. The supply has gone down to quite a trickle in recent years, and but the situation is a crisis. It is getting worse, and this policy attempts to deal with the reality of that situation. Locally, only 10% of the stock in Rother are social housing. The national average is 17%. So we're starting from a very weak position anyway. Our stock many years ago were transferred to a housing association, so we've lost that democratic accountability which councils who have their own stock have. And so this policy is an attempt to grapple with the difficult situation in which we find ourselves. There are 2,053 households on the register last year, and only 218 lets were made in the whole year. So that underlines the position that most people on the housing register will not be allocated social housing, affordable housing through Rother District Council. So that's a bad situation which we're there, but there's several key changes to this, which I'll just outline them, and then perhaps Joe might want to come in as well. There's a new emergency need category, which will hopefully speed up. The intent is to speed up the allocation of homes to those most in need. There are new savings and income threshold to ensure that only applicants who do not have the resources to resolve their own housing situation are permitted to join the housing register. And the eligibility for the housing register to those who do not reside in the district is removed. All households currently in Band D on the basis that they have no identified housing need will also be removed. The intent is to also reduce reliance on temporary accommodation and prevent homelessness. There's a new lower level of priority for accepted homeless households in temporary accommodation. And this hopefully will tackle the incentive to use homelessness and temporary accommodation as a route to social housing. There's a new priority for households who make their own temporary accommodation arrangements rather than straight away accessing temporary accommodation, and a new Band C to homeless households that accept a private rented accommodation offer to incentivise the private rented sector. And lastly, a new policy for former rough sleepers through the Housing First accommodation. So that's all I'll say at the moment. I think it is a policy which hopefully will attempt to grapple with this difficult problem of the allocation of homes locally. I should say, and I should reiterate, though, as I did at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, that this is out for consultation. It's a draft. The consultation will take place in June and July. And we'll just see what comes back through that consultation, as we may have to make changes to this. But I think this will find the support of the public and stakeholders. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation, Rory. Are there any questions? Councillor Sam Coleman.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think the state of the housing situation nationally, let alone locally, is such that we're having to look at things like this. But I'm really glad we are, because it's really important that of these thousands of people who are coming to us saying they need social housing, we make sure that those who are the very most in need are the ones who are getting that housing, who are local to the area, who are in that desperate need. And I think this goes some way to helping us achieve that. As unpalatable as it is, I think, to be making changes like this, because you in an ideal world, you'd want to house everybody who came to us saying they needed housing. But I think it's, kudos to Joe and his team for managing to put this together. And I hope the consultation response is sort of valuable. I don't know how far we're going to send this out to those organisations that work with people who are in these sorts of situations, Brighton Housing Trust, Heart, people like that, who will be on that front line and will be able to respond to us in an intelligent way. And the only other thing I was going to mention is, obviously, because we've recently adopted the socio-economic duty, and I know
why they might be withdrawing number 11. I've got to switch. Chairman's Forum.
Councillor Barnes.
Councillor Barnes, could you go on?
Okay, thank you. I thought that was my own conscience coming into sort of not usually that posh, Councillor Barnes. Yeah, as I was saying, I think now we've recently adopted the socio-economic duty. I think it's important that we start to weave that into our consultations and into our strategy documents. And maybe it's too late to put it into this one. I don't know, although I do see that there's section 3 of the actual document. It says equalities, and it mentions the usual stuff about equalities. I wondered if we could stick a line in there before it goes out to consultation, just saying something like the council has recently adopted the socio-economic duty and regard should be taken to this, or something like that. Or if not, post-consultation, I think it's important for us to look at that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for those comments, Sam. Perhaps I can give Joe Powell an opportunity to respond, if that's okay with you, Rory. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. We have gone. The draft has gone through an equalities impact assessment process on its own, and now corporately we've adopted the socio-economic duty as part of that process. So it will, by council policy, be considered. We can certainly explicitly add that to the document if you'd like, seeing as it's a new endeavour or new measure. It would be useful to do that. On the terms of collaboration, consultation, we collaborated explicitly with some key stakeholders when we developed the strategy policy, and the one BHT Sussex, for example, were one of those, and we invited a range of local stakeholders to be part of that. And there was an opportunity today, really, to extend an offer to all of your members and to the public generally that we're happy to come and speak to community groups, parish councils about the allocations consultation. We probably need a sort of, I don't know if we could do one-to-one briefings on it, but certainly if we can get a group of people together of, of number, we can certainly do that.
Okay, fine. Councillor Timpey, Hazel.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just going to ask that, Joe, because this is a really radical change, isn't it, to our housing policy. So I would be concerned that the comms around the actual consultation and where it can be found and that sort of thing, that it's really key. So I think all councillors can help with that, because this is going to affect an awful lot of residents.
It certainly is, and I think it was Councillor Barnes at Overview and Scrutiny suggested that we do a summary version of the policy so that it's more digestible and people who want to be consulted, rather than forcing them to read through the whole policy, can just digest something over a page or two. So we'll certainly be adopting that so that it's something easier to communicate. There are some challenging, it's one of those things, that the devil's in the detail, and there's some challenging, perhaps at points counterintuitive measures that we've put in place. But as I hope the report outlines, there's the objective is to essentially better prevent homelessness and then better, as we put it in the jargon, relieve homelessness or stop people from being homeless anymore through this allocations policy, and that ultimately is the priority we've set ourselves. But that helps.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just come back? Because realistically, there are going to be people dropping off this register who are currently on it, aren't there? Because they're not going to qualify anymore.
That's
so
right.
How we handle those people, I think, is really quite critical.
It is, and it's part of the job we have day to day, Chair, if I may, excuse me. But we have, managing expectations is the core of what we do as a local authority, and particularly in housing and homelessness, unfortunately, managing expectations of those who are on the register with no realistic chance of ever being awarded social housing. I think it's possibly more challenging conversation to have, but perhaps a more realistic and fairer conversation to have with the community about, opening, if you remove this option, it opens up more realistic options as an alternative, which may not be particularly palatable, and it's regressible, but that's the position that we're in.
If I can invite Councillor Paul Osborne as Chair of Scrutiny, because this came up last week at Scrutiny. Please, Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think one thing Joe didn't say was there's a sort of tightening up or beefing up of local connection as well, which should help. People stay in their own sort of area and their communities if there's any houses coming available. At Scrutiny last week, we gave it a good hearing. We're very impressed. ton of work been taken on by Joe and his team. So we were happy with that. There was mention of a task and finish group, but I think what we've decided was to get, instead of setting up a task and finish group now, which we don't really know what we're looking at because we haven't had the consultation yet, we'll get this come back. That gives the committee a bit more time to bed in, so we've got a lot of new members, so we can see what's going on. And then we can, once we've got the new housing strategy and the corporate plan, we can have a task and finish and sort of look at everything together and make sure we're heading in the right direction, basically. I think that's what the plan was. So we put it on the work programme. But I know Councillor Barnes was keen for something to happen, so that's what we'd do. But we were more than happy, Joe.
Any response to that? I think that basically there's a couple of questions externally. So I've got Councillor Terry Byrne. Terry?
Thank you, Doug. I think, first of all, I'd echo everything that Councillor McCourt has said. I think this is, we know we've got a national housing crisis, and that as an authority, we can only ever really nibble around the edges of what is a massive problem. But I think we've done that very well. There are two things that stood out for me. One is there was a myth that if you're on the waiting list, and if you were potentially homeless, if you accepted private accommodation, then you would drop off the list. And that really put some people into a difficult situation. Did they carry on to be homeless, or did they start paying a ridiculous amount that they obviously couldn't afford in the long term to move into private accommodation? You'll notice that this new strategy, the new allocations plan, says that you don't necessarily lose your place on the list if you in fact accept private, or not accept, but if you make your own arrangements to go into private accommodation. It doesn't put you off the list because you're still essentially potentially homeless. So I think that's a big step forward. There's another point which essentially is relevant to private landlords, where people say the private rented accommodation we are in currently does not meet any sort of decent home standards and is environmentally unacceptable. That is grounds for them becoming potentially homeless. However, if you look at the strategy, there is a lot more emphasis on working with the private sector and working with the tenants to try and make sure that that tenancy can continue and that property is in a decent condition. So there are two things that I think are peculiar to Rother, and they show that we are looking at the situation we find ourselves in, and instead of throwing up our hands in horror and saying, oh, it's housing, we can't do anything, we're looking for areas where we can make a real difference. And when Joe said that there's massive consultation taken, Rory, Councillor McCourt, said that he referenced the amount of consultation that had gone on, and the way in which Joe's team had gone out to other authorities and other bodies to help frame this whole approach. I think the Department of Housing, the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities actually has looked at Rother, and some of the things we're doing, they learn from us rather than we learning from them. So I think there's a big pat on the back for the way in which Joe's team has tried to come up with a housing allocations policy that's fit for purpose in the situation in which we find ourselves, and has actually chipped away at the edges of some of this disgusting situation we find ourselves in, and tried to make things that bit better for the residents of Rother. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those comments, Terry. Councillor Christine Bayliss. Christine.
Yeah, thank you. And again, I'd like to echo the comments from previous speakers about what a good document this is. With regard to the socio-economic duty, and I'm pleased that Councillor Coleman picked up the issues around that, and also actually Councillor Barnes. I hadn't been at Overview and Scrutiny Committee, so I hadn't realised that he'd suggested a cut down summary document for consultation, which I think is an excellent idea. There was a couple of, one thing in particular that when I looked at the consultation methodology, we're proposing, and I assume a lot of this is driven by cost, but a lot of it is online questionnaire. There are requests for comments from mainly our own sort of internal people, housing register applicants, an online questionnaire. I would just caution against wholly relying on online questionnaire. A lot of the people that will be impacted by this will be only able to access a questionnaire via their phones, for example, then they may not have sufficient data allowance on their phones to enable them to sort of complete this, and it may exclude some people. And I just wondered whether the team might take on a suggestion that for say the homelessness unity group and also Warming Up the Homeless, that maybe that we set up a focus group approach for those two organisations, or maybe Brighton Housing Trust as well, where actually we can get some people in for a conversation that can be reported back. So it's done in a sort of much more inclusive way than just sort of saying to people, can you fill in our online questionnaire? So that would just be my plea, and it sort of builds on obviously what Councillor Barnes mentioned at overview and scrutiny. So that would be my main point I'd like to make, but well done to everybody concerned with this.
Joe, would you like to come back on that? And if Rory wants to add anything, is the engagement presumably is something which we've obviously got to make sure that we can capture everybody that's out there. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, on the participating with local stakeholders, that many of the groups you mentioned, we were, I would say, one better than consulting them. We've collaborated with them on the draft that's before you. So we've been talking to them in a working group situation to check back and discuss before finalising the draft and at the point of inception and conception of the scope of it, and etc. So we've had a very collaborative route through to the document that's before you, and they will remain key consultees as we move through the process, and that a version or iteration of that group will be sustained. Also, we're keen to not exclude people who cannot access online. There are limits on our ability to manage that. I'll refer back to my earlier invitation that we can come out and talk to people. We'll have paper copies here at the Town Hall. We've got the parish clerks and town clerks on our network as consultees, so we encourage town and parish clerks to print versions if possible, or we can do that for them if they prefer. And to promote that as part of their parish council meetings. Again, we're happy to come along within the caveat that slightly, but we're happy to definitely to come along where we can, absolutely, and present. So, yeah, I hope that would be adequate, because I agree, in an environment of limited resources, it is challenging making consultations meaningful, but we're very keen to make them as meaningful as we possibly can.
Thank you for clarifying the work that you're doing on that. And bearing in mind that the last policy was written in 2014, and then we got stymied a little bit by COVID in 2019. So to bring this forward to this level that you and your team have done, I think is excellent, and it does give us an opportunity to push forward on what we want to be able to achieve, and I think it's absolutely vital. So thank you for that. So if I can invite Councillor McCourt to move this report, please.
Yeah, I'll formally move the report.
Someone to second the report. Thank you, Councillor Coleman, and those in favour. And that's unanimous. And thank you, Joe and Caroline and all of your team for this, bringing all this together. It's been an exceptionally in-depth piece of work, so thank you for that. I think we're almost there now, aren't we? I think that's the end of... Yes, because item 11 has been withdrawn. So thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Thank you for those online, wherever you might be, in Spain or various other places. But thank you for making a contribution this evening. And thank you for members of the public here. And And Councillor Coleman wants to thank somebody else, no doubt, perhaps.
Chair, I just wanted to be cheeky and take the opportunity to wish everyone in Cabinet a happy Pride Month. It's Pride Month. Thanks, Chair.
Very kind of you, thanks very much. Okay, so the meeting is closed at whatever time it is.